Morning, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 57 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022, and therefore members can attend in person, in the room, and remotely using the Zoom application. Should any technical challenges arise, please advise me. And please note that we may need to suspend for a few minutes as we need to ensure that all members are able to participate fully. Conformément à l'article
pursuant to Standing Order 108.3 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, January 31st, 2023, the committee is resuming its study of the subject matter of the report of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner entitled the ING Report.
Now, in accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I am informing that our witnesses appearing virtually have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. J'aimerais maintenant souhaiter.
I would like to now welcome our witness for the first hour today.
Minister Mary Ng. Minister, you have 5 minutes to address the committee. Please start.
Bon matin. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to appear here today. I want to start by providing just a few words of context on this matter and my own personal perspective on all that has transpired. But before I get to any of that, let me be clear in saying once again that I made a mistake. My office contracted services from someone close to me, a friend, someone capable, an expert in her field, and qualified. But because of our friendship, I should have recused myself from any and all dealings. For that, I have apologized to my colleagues, to the House, to the public, and I want to start this appearance by apologizing here again directly to the members of this committee. Pour cela, je me suis.
For that, I have apologized to my colleagues, to the House, to the public. And I wanted to start this appearance by apologizing here again directly to the members of this committee.
In February 2019, my office arranged with the Department for Media and Presentation Training, including myself and my staff. The services were provided by Pomp and Circumstance, one of the country's leading communications firms. It is co-founded by Amanda Alvara, a well-known communications professional. The value of the contract was well below the threshold set in Part 7.1.1 of Treasury Board guidelines, and I believed what we were in full compliance with all relevant rules. A year later, in March 2020, we turned to Pomp and Circumstance again for support. It was a time of enormous emergency and urgency at the beginning of the pandemic, and demand for information about new emergency programs was intense, especially for Canada's small businesses. Departmental resources were clearly going to have to be supplemented. We relied on Pomp and Circumstance to help us communicate details about these supports, to help with media appearances, to support communications planning, and in particular to provide social media strategy, design, and execution. Again, the contract amounts were below the threshold established by Treasury Board guidelines, and I believe that we were acting in full compliance. And that was my mistake. In fact, in both instances, the Ethics Commissioner determined that it was my failure to recuse that resulted in his findings. Not the contract amounts, not the use of a qualified professional firm, not the work itself, all of which was completed well and under severe timelines. The Ethics Commissioner's determination was that it was my failure to recuse because of my personal friendship with Ms. Alvaro. That was the issue, and I accept his ruling. All contract awards were publicly disclosed. I cooperated fully with the Commissioner's examination. I've accepted the findings. I've implemented new protocols in my office and with the department, and I have apologized. I recognize that my mistake means that I will have to work even harder. All I can say is that I'm committed to doing that hard work, and I hope that people will see and recognize that my efforts are sincere. Je reconnais que mon...
I recognize that I will have to work even harder. All I can say is that I am committing I am committed to doing that hard work, and I hope that people will see that and recognize my efforts as sincere.
Be pleased to take any questions from the committee. Merci. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Minister. And for the purposes of committee, we do have a few subs in this morning. Ms. Lansman is here, Mr. Dalton will be here, Ms. Katrakis is here, and we do have some members on Zoom as well. So we'll begin with the first round of questioning for 6 minutes. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Barrett. Mr. Barrett, you have 6 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Minister, for joining us in person this morning. As you know, we've got some pretty tight timelines for our questions, so try to move through this quickly. How often did you and Ms. Alvaro discuss communications and media?
In the course of the time that I have known her, she and I started working together in the Ontario government, in the Education Minister's office at the time. She was the communications director. I was the policy director. So over the course of the time that I've known her, she and I would talk about communications, but we would talk about politics. We would talk about a whole range of issues.
Okay, perhaps in your time as a minister, would you say it was quite often?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. From time to time, she and I would have a general conversation, but we're friends. So I would have a general conversation about a lot of things.
Okay. We were told when your deputy minister appeared that your department has about 100 communications public servants. Is that correct?
That's what the deputy shared. That would be correct.
Okay. How many political exempt or political comms staff do you have that report to your chief?
4.
4? Okay. And they're all pretty good at their jobs?
I would say that everyone is professional and capable and carry out their duties well.
Okay. So at about 9:45 last night, members of this committee received the documents that we'd requested. So it was about 10:30 last night that our staff would have been looking them over in anticipation of your appearance this morning. Did you know that they were going to be tabled at last night?
I did not. I understood that we would be in compliance with the request of this committee.
Indeed, you were. The time was the time of day in for an 8:45 committee appearance. I would characterize as unfortunate. Do you understand that disclosure to be complete? That is 100%. It includes, as was the document production order as it listed, 100% of the work product per your 2 contracts with Pomp and Circumstance and Miss Alvaro?
What I know is that we are in compliance with the motion of this committee with respect to document production.
Okay. What in the work that Miss Alvaro did for you, and perhaps in 30 seconds or less, could you characterize as work that was done that the 4 political staff or 100 public servants could not do for you, did not have the expertise to do?
I wouldn't characterize it as expertise because I think that the political staff have expertise. I think the department has expertise, but I would situate you in March of 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, and I think it was all hands on deck. Every resource available to help Canadians and to get supports out to Canadians, and part of that was helping Canadian businesses, particularly small businesses, understand the range of supports and help that was available. So it was really all hands. It was all hands on deck and then some.
Okay. In anticipation of your visit today and your interactions with media, did you chat with your friend Miss Alvaro in preparation for that?
It's been established that Amanda and I are friends, but we also decided at the very beginning when this matter started that she and I would not speak about this matter, and that we would allow the work of the commissioner, and that we would allow all the necessary process to take place, and that she and I would respect that, and we have.
Okay. It's really important that Canadians are able to have confidence in their public institutions and their public officials. When we have incidents where members of the public service or designated public office holders are found to have broken procurement rules, it damages Canadians' confidence in the institution that they work for, the department that they work for. It undermines, I think, brand Canada. Do you think that when federal ethics or procurement rules are violated, that there should be restitution made, that taxpayers should be made whole for the wrongdoing?
I can speak to my circumstance as it relates to this particular matter that the Commissioner examined. And as I said in my opening remarks, I believed that I did and that we did comply with the rules because the requirements for Treasury Board guidelines were fulfilled, and the Commissioner indeed ruled that it was my recusal that is the error, to which I accept.
Okay.
And for that I accept, and I've put measures in place to ensure that this does not happen again.
Minister, I have 30 seconds left, so I have two questions. So, furthering the interests of your friend is not in compliance with the rules, and with respect to having public, maintaining public confidence, do you think that taxpayers should be reimbursed, and do you think that to ensure Canadians' confidence and to uphold ministerial accountability, that you should remain in cabinet? Do you think that your resignation is warranted in this case?
I think that in this case, I've already said that that I have made an error, and that I have a lot of work to do. I have taken active steps to ensure that something like this will not happen again. And I hope that Canadians will see that my efforts in serving them, and I do believe that the position I occupy is a privilege, and that my work and my continued hard work for Canadians, I commit to do, and I hope that Canadians will see that sincerity in that work.
Thank you, Minister. We're now going to go to Ms. Hepner. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank the Minister for being here today without hesitation to answer our questions. I think it takes a lot of courage to immediately admit that you made a mistake and to commit to ensuring that the same mistake won't happen again. I will tell you that during the pandemic, when all of this was rolling out and these contracts were happening, I was on the other side. I was a journalist and mostly tasked with covering those daily news conferences. And I have to say that from my perspective, the information was clear. There was a lot of information. These were really complicated programs that the government was rolling out, and I want to thank you for making it easy for journalists to absorb all that information. But I know that that's, as a former broadcaster, I know that that sort of thing doesn't come naturally or easily to most people. And I'm wondering if you can tell me what you were going through during that time when you were faced with this task of these programs that the government was rolling out to help Canadians, and you needed to communicate that.
Thank you very much for the question. The only thing that was going through my mind was the work that was needed to help businesses keep their employees on payroll, help businesses get through the enormous difficulty when their doors shut and that they had no revenue coming in. I grew up in a small business. I know what it means if your door is shut and you have no more customers, but you have staff on the payroll and you've got to pay them. I know many businesses who were talking to us. We had an 11 o'clock call in my department, thousands upon thousands of businesses. All of the members here were faced with calls and requests for information from their constituents and from their businesses about what the government was going to do. Many people.
The interpreter would like to note that there is noise from the earpiece that the minister is holding.
Many ministers, including myself, and having the small business file, I was
Point
among
of order.
one.
Excuse me, Minister. Mr. Green, I believe I know what your point is going to be. Minister, I understand that you've got the earpiece in your hand,
sorry.
and it's causing a problem, not just for the interpreters, but I suspect for Mr. Green. Go ahead, Mr. Green.
No, I was mostly for interpretation. It
Okay.
had been noted that I was creating quite a lot of feedback and distraction.
Okay, thank you. I've stopped the time. So, Ms. Hepner or Ms. Minister, go ahead, please.
Apologize for that, MP Green, and to the interpreter. As I was saying, the only thing on my mind was how to make sure that we got the information about the programs that were changing as well, because they were responding to the needs of businesses at the time. So when I look and reflect back at the kinds of programs, they were lending support, the small business loan. It was the deferral of the GST and HST for small businesses and for entrepreneurs, those sole proprietors. It was wage subsidies to make sure that employers could keep their employees on staff. It was deferring income taxes. It was relief for commercial rent. It was supports for young entrepreneurs, but high growth companies who had a different threshold that they needed to meet. It was making sure that there was regional supports because the needs across the country were different. But these were developed over the course of days and weeks. And my absolute priority, the government's absolute priority, was to be sure that we were able to effectively share this information with businesses and entrepreneurs so that they could access the supports. And today, I would say some 5.3 million jobs were saved because of the wage subsidy. To give you a sense of the take-up on the loans, within a week of us launching that small business loan program, there were just under 200,000 businesses that were approved within a week. I mean, just to give you a scale, today there's probably just under, through that period, just under 1 million businesses, so about 960,000 businesses that got access to the loan. And on the deferral of GST, HST customs duties, 3.2 million businesses were helped because of just those three things, in addition to the list of other programs and supports that we put forward. But to answer your question, that was the top priority. And that was the top priority for days, for weeks, for months. And we kept doing this work because, and I would say that everyone did this work, including all members here, because we all represent businesses, we all represent Canadians, we all represent those constituents who are looking to us.
Do you think there would have been as much uptake of those programs? Do you think as many Canadians and as many businesses would have benefited if you hadn't been able to communicate those programs effectively?
Even through all of our communications channel, through the media who was asking us questions, through social media channels, through communicating through members of Parliament offices, through business associations like Chambers and the various business associations, we were communicating and sharing, and even with that, there was still incredible demand because businesses, particularly small businesses that are 99% of this country, they have a range of skills and resources. So us doing everything we possibly can to get the information with clarity, to be able to assist them at the time of an absolute crisis in this country was the focus. So yes, I do believe that level and the amount of communications helped to help Canadians understand what was there so that they could appropriately get that support to get them through what was a very difficult time in this country.
And was your training through pomp and circumstance, did it make your communications easier or better? Did it help?
It did help because before the pandemic, as the small business minister, the media requests were not in that level of volume. I can tell you that immediately when the pandemic hit, because so many small businesses across the country were directly affected and wanted information from the government, the requests were exponential, not only from the media, but also from stakeholders and from Canadians all across the country.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hepner. Thank you, Minister. Monsieur Villemure, vous avez 6.
You have 6 minutes for your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Minister, thank you for being with us today. Just a bit of context before I start. You admitted your mistake from the get-go, but the consequences, the positive consequences, are not as interesting to us. We want to go straight to the facts. In your view, in the current circumstances, because of the trust of the public, that is a bit cynical. Is it enough to just apologize?
I want to maybe just draw the committee to the conclusion of the commissioner. And the determination here was my failure to recuse. But it was not because the contract, it wasn't the contract amount, because that met the rules. It wasn't the work itself, which was done and performed, and under severe timelines. It was not the fact that a qualified firm was indeed retained. I have apologized. I recognize that mistake and that error. I also recognize that I have to work even harder to demonstrate to the Canadian public that I have work to do to make sure that they understand that I take this seriously, which I do, and the proactive work that has to be done, that is being done. I've initiated a screen with the ethics commissioner between pomp and circumstance, Ms. Navarro and myself in my office. I've arranged for training, which will take place within a month, delivered by the commissioner to my own staff as well, and I continue to work with the commissioner. Maybe what I would also say is that a lesson learned here for me is that the commissioner is there as a resource, and should there ever be any questions that need advice, that we could certainly be reaching out more. And I also intend to do that, and those are the various steps. And I think that as a responsible public office holder, that is my work, and I need to keep doing that hard work for Canadians.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. The trust of Canadians is at the heart of the actions of the Commissioner. And this is what we're focusing on. Now, who in your office decided to award the contract?
As minister, you have a delegation of authority, so that those who are delegated with the authority to act on your behalf for a range of matters do that. That is there, and those delegations work not only to my own political staff, but also to the civil service and the deputy as well. But in this particular case, it was my office that initiated and negotiated the contract.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. When we're talking about ethics, you know the rules shared by the Commissioner, and they are the minimum required to not damage trust. Should we reinforce the rules so that the trust of Canadians be as optimal as possible? Because the rules are the bare minimum. So what should be done according to you?
I think that that ensuring that the public always has trust in Canadian institutions, and those who serve it, like the office holders in the Ethics Commission, or any of the office holders that do the job of ensuring our public institutions operate, is enormously important. And in fact, that is that is something that we as Canadians have a lot to be proud of, because I think we have among the strongest institutions in the world. I think that, as I said earlier, I think the lesson learned for me here is to continue to do the work of making sure that new staff, understand their obligations. So you don't do training once. You do it perhaps with some regularity. You do a refresh so that those who come in to do their jobs have the tools that they need to do their jobs. And part of having the tools to do their job is understanding the rules to which they that they fall within. As someone who has spent her career in learning institutions or in the area of learning. I think the continuous learning and making sure that institutions and organizations work fully is what Canadians expect of us, and I think that this is what I mean about needing to work hard and to continue to work hard.
Croyez-vous, puis il me reste juste un petit peu de
I only have a little bit of time left. Do you believe that it would be good for people to understand the meanings of interest and conflicts of interest? Because we always say we need to avoid a conflict of interest, but do you think that this notion is well understood?
I think it's always good to have more understanding. So to ensure that there is better understanding of all obligations and of the role of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, I think is something that we should all understand. And I would say public office holders and ministers like myself, those who are in our offices, but indeed all of us. I mean, but there are mechanisms in place. I mean, we all fill out every year a declaration, and I think that process is a good one because it requires it is something that is up to date and that holds us accountable, and that is good.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Minister. I gave a bit more time to all of the questions.
You're next, Mr. Green. You may get a little more time than 6 minutes because I have given it to some of the others as well. Thank you. Mr. Green, you have 6 minutes or more.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister Ring, I'm going to ask a series of questions in a rather rapid way. I'm going to ask that you keep your remarks as brief as possible. If there are opportunities for you to reply yes or no, that would suffice. We really want to get to the heart of the matter and hopefully be able to move beyond this situation in our committee and get to the good work of the Ethics Committee. So I'm going to begin with your relationship with Ms. Alvaro. You had mentioned that you have been friends for quite some time. Did Ms. Alvaro ever work in any capacity for any of your political campaigns? And if so, in what role?
Ms. Alvaro volunteered on my campaign in 2017 when I was a first-time candidate. She volunteered.
In which role?
She did communications work, spokespeople
in
work.
Subsequent campaigns, did you ever pay her for communications work, support work, campaign work?
I've never paid Ms. Alvaro for her volunteer work.
Okay. In your role as a minister, you noted that your office made a mistake. In fact, we see quite clearly that Mr. Jason Easton's signature is on the procurement contract. And yet, when your deputy minister was here, he noted that that was not a regular practice. How often does your chief of staff directly procure contracts on your behalf?
In my delegation of authority, there is a limit threshold for the delegation of.
Wasn't my question missing? How often does your chief of staff procure on your behalf, given that your deputy minister and the person responsible for procurement noted that that is not a typical practice coming out of the minister's office? How often do you do that?
It would be in the course of his work in the carrying out of the function of running a minister's office.
How many contracts are you personally procuring on behalf of your ministry?
I don't personally procure any contracts.
How many does Mr. Easton procure on your behalf? It was noted as being out of the ordinary.
A delegation of authority to a chief of staff is not out of the ordinary. A delegation.
That's not what I asked. It's the procurement of contracts that is out of the ordinary, as was the testimony of the procurement department here.
The delegation of authority allows for a chief of staff
Okay,
to.
Ms. Singh, if you don't want to answer the question, that's fine. I will go on to the scope of work because I want to get a clear sense for what the deliverables were. We note in the communication support plan submitted in the documents that there were key strategies and deliverables. The first was overall social media campaign, including hashtags. What was the outcome of the generated use of those hashtags? How many interactions or times did you use it?
I wouldn't be able to tell you specifically how many, but I would say that using a hashtag was simply a means of being able to share wider under that particular subject. To
I'll note for
Canadians.
the record, and maybe you can confirm, that you didn't use the first two, standing up for small biz, standing for small biz. I will note that from my search, you used support for small biz twice. The other hashtags seem to have been adopted from a conference somewhere else in 2017. So in that use of hashtags, you have also in the scope of work below the MP toolkit, video questions and answers, including Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter lives. How many of those activities did you actually were delivered given this strat plan?
Every week, I delivered a Ask Me Anything so that all businesses, any small businesses across the country would be able to ask me anything.
Where?
On Instagram.
Where did you?
On Instagram.
Okay. And what about Facebook Live? How many live videos did you do for there? Because it said facilitate and support. So I want to know how many Facebook Lives did Ms. Alvaro facilitate and support?
There were Facebook Lives with a range of social media type commentaries that I participated in. It was, I couldn't give you a specific number. What I can say was that it was very regular because...
How many Twitter Lives did you have?
The one Twitter Live that comes to mind would be one with Amber Mack, as an example. She is someone who is a commentator for a range of technology-type businesses. That one comes to mind.
At the conclusion of this meeting, Missing, I would request that you submit to us and maybe have your staff prepare a list of deliverables in terms of the outcomes and note where Ms. Alvaro facilitated and supported. Because I've done a quick search. I'm not finding a lot of your stuff online here. I'm seeing that this is supposed to be facilitated and delivered, but particularly on Twitter, I'm not really seeing a lot. So I'm going to go back to your relationship here. You're mentioning that you're doing the work, that you're training. Would that not have been part of the course of your ascension to minister? Are you suggesting that you didn't know this was going to be a conflict going into this? That you need training on what is the most basic pecuniary interest for your close friend? Is that something you didn't know?
What I mean by the training is that we can always improve, and certainly after the finding of this report.
Were you aware of compliance or preventative measures available to you? I'm just a fourth-party backbench MP. I recall my orientation. They were pretty clear about this stuff. So I'm wondering, at what point did you miss this, and did you not, as a minister, have an enhanced education on what would be considered a conflict of interest, yes or no?
I didn't recuse. That was a mistake. I understood that we were under compliance because the Treasury Board rules were met on the amount of the contract.
That's not compliance. You being not recusing makes you out of compliance. So the fact that you didn't recuse yourself tells me you either knew and did it anyways, or you didn't know. So my question to you is, were you aware that there were compliance preventative measures available to you? If so, why did you not recuse yourself? You've done this contract twice now.
Short answer, Minister.
I failed to recuse both times. The Commissioner found that that was the error. I accept that error.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Green. We're going to now go to our second round. I am going to stick to the timelines on this round. We'll start with Ms. Lanceman for 5 minutes, and I do acknowledge that Ms. Roberts is here as well on behalf of Mr. Dalton. Ms. Lanceman, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Minister, for being here. The statement says you take full responsibility for your actions, and we know that you didn't recuse yourself. We know there was a failure to recuse. We know that you further the interest of a friend to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars. Full responsibility. Do you think you should pay back the money? Do you think you should pay back the money to the taxpayer?
I think I answered this earlier, but I think it bears repeating. It was my mistake not to recuse, and it's what resulted in the Commissioner's finding. But it was not the work itself, which was completed. It was not that a qualified firm was hired. It was the failure to recuse. And for this error, I have said to this committee and to the House and to the public that I apologize for this, and in an effort to continue to work hard for Canadians and to make sure that this will never happen again, I have initiated strengthen protocols.
Yeah, we know what you've initiated. We know that you've apologized, but full responsibility to, I think most people would deem that that to mean that you would pay back the money that not only you didn't recuse yourself for, but you furthered the interest of your best friend. So I think we'll leave that there. You had 104 staffers in communications. 4 from the exempt staff, which means they work in your office, 100 from the department from what the deputy minister said. They couldn't write the talking points. You said the documents that we got last night at 9:45 were fulsome documents. It didn't seem like a fulsome contract.
Is that the question?
Yeah. What if you want a question? What was in those documents that the 104 people couldn't do during that time?
With respect to the documents, I think I shared earlier with your colleague that we have and are in compliance with the motion. And in 2020, it really is all hands. It was all hands on deck. The team at Global Affairs do excellent work. They work with 3 different ministers. They also do work across the globe. And my team, of course, also does that communications work as well. But the extraordinary effort that was required at the beginning of the pandemic was such that we really needed all hands on deck. The requirements for me to share with Canadians the range of supports which go from.
I think we heard a little bit more of that. I'm gonna go on to some questions. So there was a failure recusal to further the interest of your friend to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars. In addition to the 104 communication staffer, that's 208 hands to have been able to write the talking points, which we got at committee last night at 9:45, which weren't fulsome. I have a question. You grew up in a small business. If somebody stole from the small business, you would expect an apology. You would expect a commitment not to do that again, and you would probably, in the case where it is possible, expect the person to return what they stole. Don't you think that that's the same here?
I reject that premise. No one stole. What the commissioner found here was that I failed to recuse. He did not find that the contract amount was an issue. That was in compliance with the Treasury Board guidelines. And the work was done.
So just to be clear, so you've given a sole source contract to the benefit of your friend for tens of thousands of dollars, and just to put on the record, you do not believe that you should pay that money back, given that you broke the rules.
What I've said to this committee and through you to the public is that that I regret the error that was made. I know that I have work to do. I know that I will need to work very hard in the eyes of Canadians, and I'm going to do that, and I hope that they see this work and the work going forward as sincere on my part. I've taken steps and measures with the Conflict of Interest Commissioner to be sure that a screen is put in place for pomp and circumstance and for Ms. Alvaro.
So that's a no.
Okay, Ms. Lantzman, that's all your time. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Fergus for 5 minutes. Mr. Fergus.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Minister, for being with us.
Your first language and one that you feel most comfortable, so I'll continue with that. Minister, you and your office were asked by this committee to provide materials to this committee, and we gave you a deadline of Tuesday to do so, to provide it to us so that we would have it in time in both official languages. You provided this information to us yesterday, well in advance of Tuesday's deadline. I'd like to just thank you for doing so, because it makes our job that much more easier to be able to have the materials in front to make this evaluation. Minister, you had spent a bit of time in your opening statement. You also spent some time with regard to answering the questions from my colleagues. I would like to ask you a more precise question, if I could. When the deputy minister came before this committee, he suggested that there should be additional training. There could be additional training for staff who are involved in the contracting process. What do you think of that recommendation? Can you please be specific as to how we can make sure that the verifications now going forward will happen without a conflict of interest coming up again?
Absolutely. I agree with the deputy. Think that there should be additional training. Staff changes over. I've arranged for training for with the commissioner's office for my team. That will happen in March, and I'm also working with the commissioner's office to strengthen protocols to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
When the commissioner for ethics had issued his report, he noted that, well, look, he noted that the material was delivered, that things, that wasn't a matter of the amount that was being produced, but you failed to recuse yourself. What are your comments about this report itself? Do you think it was fair?
I appreciate the work that the ethics commissioner has done in this regard, and I thank him for this work. And what his finding was in my failure to recuse is something that I accept, and I'm working with him now to make sure that there are preventative measures in place to prevent this from happening again.
What type of training that you have contracted with the Commissioner of Ethics, and when will that be happening?
That will happen in March. It will be for all of my staff and myself, and it will review again the obligations that we as public office holders and our obligations under conflict of interest and ethics.
Very briefly, Minister, because I don't have a lot of time left, with regard to the use of these services, I recall how it was pandemonium at the front end of the pandemic. There were issues, there were a lot of things coming at us. In what ways do you feel that this contract helped you connect and provide information in a clear manner towards Canadians so that they can access these services during the pandemic?
The frequency of the requests were just exponential at the time. The number of programs were, had different design elements to it that needed explaining to the range of different businesses. The ability to able to speak clearly and as simply to members of the media who is a really important channel to speak to Canadians and to businesses, that training helped. To meet Canadians where they're at, which is on social media, and to put information out that way, that helped. To have the tools, whether they were video tools or whether they were clear Q's and A's to businesses that we could send to business associations or chambers, etc., that helped. So the work that was done to help articulate clearly to millions of Canadians, small businesses across the country, on how to access and the assistance provided to my office helped us do that work, in addition to the very good and strong work that the civil service did.
Thank you, Minister. Merci, Monsieur Fergus.
Thank you, Mr. Fergus. Mr. Villemur, you have 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you very much for the generous 2.5 minutes. Madam Minister, in that short time, I just want to repeat that we know that the amounts are not the problem. But I just want to know, did Ms. Alvaro help you in preparing this morning?
No.
No, d'accord.
Perfect. You talked about how you communicated with the ethics commissioner, and given your experience, what kind of additional training should public office holders receive? Because you're in the middle of a contract, things go quickly. What's missing in training?
I think it's the frequency of it. I mean, in each of our offices and departments, people change. They may work in a job, and if you're new to the assignment, or you've changed offices even in a same assignment, I think it's important to have just more regularity to it. This is something that we all take seriously. We certainly do. But in the course of day-to-day work, at times you should be refreshed. So I think the frequency of the frequency of it would help.
Est-ce que vous croyez que le filtre
Do you believe that the anti-conflict of interest filter proposed by the Ethics Commissioner should be applied in all cases?
I believe it is applied, and I believe that we fulfill the obligations, and I think that there is opportunity to perhaps seek the advice of the commissioner. I do that anyways, and I think offices do. But perhaps working on a method where it is, if unsure, just take that pause and perhaps make that call. I would say in the case of 2020, with the urgency that was upon us with the pandemic crisis, we were also in that context.
Merci beaucoup. Puis juste en quelques
Thank you. In a few seconds. The fact that you didn't recuse yourself, was that a matter of lack of goodwill?
It was a mistake.
D'accord.
Merci
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Villemur.
you for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Ms. Singh, how long has your chief of staff been working with you?
From the very beginning of my appointment, so since 2018.
So there was no change of staff there. You keep referencing that in your need for training, there needs to be updated training because there's a change of staff, but you've just suggested there's been no change of staffing in your office.
Not a change of my chief of staff, but change of other
Correct.
staff.
And at the level of the chief of staff signed off on the contract, is that not correct?
Yes.
Is your chief of staff with you here today?
No.
Okay. In your interview with the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, you stated that your chief of staff, who had the delegated authority for negotiating and establishing contracts, was aware of your friendship with Amanda Alvaro. To your knowledge, were your staff familiar with the Conflict of Interest Act and its obligations?
Yes, everyone is familiar with their obligations.
So did your chief of staff or any other member of your staff approach you about their concerns regarding the contract in relationship to the Act?
I think, as I said here earlier, actually I didn't say it, it is the public office holder who holds the accountability, and that is ministerial accountability.
I want to know, it's a very, very specific question, but I'm asking you to answer for the benefit of this committee. Did anybody in your office not flag this as being a problem? Yes or no? Simple.
It was not flagged.
Your chief of staff, who's been with you for 5 years in a high political position, who signed off on a contract, who sent an email to procurement saying, let's get on this ASAP, did not recognize that awarding a sole source procurement contract to your best friend was a conflict of interest. Is that your testimony here today?
No, what I said earlier, and I will repeat, that we believed that we were in compliance because we met
Minister
the
Ng,
Treasury Board
did
rules.
your chief of staff, you weren't in compliance because you breached it because of the conflict of interest. Did your
The
chief of
amount
staff-
of the contract
Not my
met the
question.
rules of the Treasury
Minister,
Board
I'm going to
guidelines.
let Mr. Green ask the question, please.
That's
and
not
then
my
he's gonna
question.
respond.
Your refusal to answer this question is only going to result in more question. And so I just need you to answer it. Somebody who's been on the Hill for 5 years in a senior
Quickly.
political position, your testimony is that they didn't understand awarding a contract to your best friend was a problem? Yes or no?
I said here that the recusal was something I should have done, but we believed we were in compliance because
And
we
nobody-
met
nobody-
the Treasury Board guidelines.
Okay.
This is basic stuff.
Okay,
This is-
Mr. Green, I'm sorry, that's all the time you have. We're now going to go to Mr. Barrett for 5 minutes. Mr. Barrett.
Minister, on what dates did the training sessions occur? And while you look for the dates, I'll ask you my next question. At those sessions, were there training materials provided? Was there a slideshow presentation, any handouts, laminates displayed on an overhead projector, anything like that?
So let me answer your first question.
Please.
There was a virtual meeting session on April the 10th and a second one on May the 3rd. And what
2020 for both, ma'am?
2020, yes.
Okay, go on.
And what we reviewed, if to my recollection, is preparation for a video that will help me communicate the range of supports that our government was providing to Canadians. There were a series of mock questions that would simulate questions that media would ask.
Sure.
Some of the things that I covered in the video training is actually in a document that we shared with you, but it would include things like, what is the Canadian Emergency
Right.
Wage
So
Subsidy? How
we've
do
rec-
I apply?
Thank you. We received those. But was there a slide deck or
No.
a digital presentation of any type?
No.
How long were the sessions in duration each?
I don't recall specifically, but typically
Approximately.
they would approximately be, a few hours,
Okay, so maybe 4 hours between the two?
probably each.
Okay, and
It was a lot of work.
who was in attendance?
They were done virtually because it was in the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So myself and Ms. Alvaro.
One-on-one.
There may be other people on the screen, but I was working with Ms. Alvaro.
Were your 4 exempt staff, comm staff, on the call?
On the virtual training for me to do these visual presentations, considering it was me that has to answer to the public, no.
Okay. So those sessions were about $2,000 per hour. And your salary as a minister is about 4 times the average Canadian salary. And for that salary, you used your position to further the interests of your personal friend, your best friend, to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars. Do you not think that in this scenario that warrants that the taxpayers are reimbursed? Do you think that someone should pay the money back?
Maybe what I'll do is draw your attention to some of the documents that we provided, which show the range of
Ma'am,
work products.
with all due respect, do you think someone should pay the money back? You or the vendor? You could split it? Like, what's...
I want to be clear about what the issue is that the
The issue
commissioner
is,
examined.
let me be clear about the issue, and we've heard this from Canadians. The issue is that we have a minister of the Crown who used her position to further the interests of her friend. And Canadians are lined up at food banks in record numbers, and Canadians are struggling to keep the heat on in their homes. And in that, while this is happening, while small businesses were closing, while businesses were struggling, there wasn't a competition for these contracts. Your friend got a jammy $2,000 per hour gig, and those checks cleared, and Canadians are worried about paying their bills, keeping the heat on, how they're going to afford to feed their family. They want to know if they're going to be made whole. Are Canadians going to get their money back?
To the point that you made about Canadians and the difficulty, I agree with you. It's exactly why our government has been implementing and putting forward a range of measures to help make life more affordable for Canadians today.
Yes or no, ma'am?
I think I've given you my answer.
Well, it sounds like a no. And I would say in the context that you're unwilling to recognize the hardship that Canadians are facing and the enormity of these sums of money to Canadians, tens of thousands of dollars, a rate of $2,000 per hour. I think the average Canadian hourly wage works out to about $38 an hour. That's why Canadians have asked if you saw fit to remain in office, if you should resign. That's why we've asked for that. Will you?
I know that, I know you're not going to accept the answers that I've provided, but I have provided my answers on this matter. And what I've said here is that what Canadians can expect of me is that I will work hard, and I will work hard on their behalf, working hard on their behalf, including making life more affordable for Canadians.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you. I have Mr. Fergus next for 5 minutes.
Madame la Ministre,
Madam Minister, let's talk about things directly with regards to the goods and services that you received from Pomp and Circumstance. Can you describe to us the different products and services that you received, goods and services that you received from Ms. Alvaro, and how they allowed you to better communicate with Canadians?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. There were 2 full media training sessions. There was a communications plan that was developed. There were a range of communications products, including graphics and videos, to help communicate the supports that were available to small businesses. And these were used across a wide range of mediums, including social media platforms, to reach as many Canadians as possible. In the material that I provided, you will see a video transcript that I used, and it's written in plain language in a way to help as clearly and as succinctly as possible to provide information in what I hoped as simply as possible to Canadians at the time. There were a lot of initiatives at the time. I think we will all remember. And I listed a range of them, whether it is the HST or GST and customs duty deferrals, to which millions of businesses were able to use it, and how did it help? It helped help them meet with their cash flow shortage at the time, and the loans. The small business loans and the eligibility requirements that were in that was in that program needed to be clearly shared with Canadian businesses so that they could access that. The wage subsidy, 75% wage subsidy, and colleagues here may remember that that threshold changed and evolved in the early days of the pandemic in response to what businesses were telling us at the time, and again to ensure that there is integrity, to ensure that that businesses were able to apply and receive that support. It was to be able to provide information to them in a very clear way. So the communications plan looked at how we might do that, to whom we needed to reach. In my office, in my department, there were calls every day at 11 o'clock. And those 11 o'clock calls had businesses there, they had chambers there, they had business associations there, sharing with us what was happening on the ground, but also sharing with us the iterations that we might have to consider to make, in addition to many in this room who shared with through members of Parliament who shared with us the experiences. So the services and the products that were prepared to help us get this very important and critical information to the very people that mattered the most, and that was to Canadians and to Canadian small businesses.
Alors, avec ces séances
So, with these personal briefing sessions, with the communications plan, with the products, the graphics, the videos, with transcription, I imagine all of that represents more than 4 hours of work, as my opposition colleague alleged. It was much more time spent on the production of those materials.
That would be correct. It would be my direct time that they spent which would be in and around 2 sessions and the hours spent with that. But in addition to that, the range of work and the products prepared, as I just described, was also work performed by Pomp and Circumstance.
Il m'en reste.
I don't have a lot of time left, Madam Minister. The Ethics Commissioner stated that the only issue was your failure to recuse yourself from the awarding of this contract. But with regards to the amounts that were awarded, with regards to the services and the qualifications of this high-quality company, none of that was in question. And that was why you didn't recuse yourself from the awarding of that contract. Is that correct?
Response, Minister.
That's correct. The value of the contract was below the threshold set out in Treasury Board, and I believe that we were in compliance because we fulfilled that compliance with the Treasury Board guidelines.
Okay. Merci, Monsieur Fergus. Minister, I have a question or two. At the time that the contract was initiated, were you posting your own material on your own social media platforms, or was one of your staff doing that?
I would say, as practice would be, I do, but my staff largely would.
Okay. Was any of the staff who were posting at that time with Ms. Alvaro actually part of the training session? Because you said earlier that it was you and Ms. Alvaro one-on-one for those series of hours. Any of those staff on that training session with Ms. Alvaro? And who was the staff member?
The staff members who were with me at the time of the pandemic are no longer in my office now.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Minister Ng, for your time today. We are going to suspend for a few minutes. We have our next witness. She's available. We're going to suspend for a couple of minutes, and then we'll be right back. Thank you. Okay, I want to welcome everyone back for the second hour. I'd now like to welcome our second hour guest. We've got Amanda Alvaro, who is in communications with the company Pomp and Circumstance. Ms. Alvaro, you have 5 minutes before the committee. Please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for inviting me here today. I'd like to begin by providing some context. March of 2020 was not a business as usual time. It was the onset of a global pandemic. It was, by any account, an extraordinary time. The deputy minister who spoke on this matter on Tuesday referred to the internal ministry operations at the time as chaotic, and that everyone who was involved was inordinately busy, his words. The volume of media requests to the minister's office had peaked to an all-time high, increasing roughly sixfold. And small businesses, many of whom were forced to temporarily shut down, were rightfully demanding information about how to access early government supports, like the emergency wage subsidy. Minister Mary Ng was one of a few ministers who were tasked with a major communications role at this time. Her mandate as the Minister for Small Business meant that she had several serious announcements to make, and there was an intense urgency to get that information out as widely and expeditiously as possible. That was the catalyst for why our agency was engaged for professional communication support. My friendship with Mary grew out of a professional relationship. We worked together, me in a communication role and her as a policy advisor. Because we knew each other first and primarily in these roles, she has from time to time sought my communications advice, and I have been happy to provide it. Giving counsel over the phone or over coffee in an ad hoc way is not the same as being asked for the requirements of the minister's office had in March of 2020. The effort to undertake was ultimately to develop a communications plan, which included media training, the production of social and digital media assets, a 7-minute video with cut downs, media list development, media outreach, content calendar, coordination of media, podcasts, and Instagram Lives, the neighborhood of 6. To be very frank, when it became clear that Mary and her office needed more than just some advice, my partner and I initially did not want to take on the work. And contrary to assertions that have been made, we didn't need it. To give you perspective, this work accounted for less than 0.5% of our annual revenue in 2020. It also came at a time when we were pressed internally with competing client needs and would be required to pull staff off of work to get the job done in a compressed timeline. The reason we ultimately decided to do it was because on reflection, we felt that it was the right thing to do. As small business owners ourselves, we knew how clearly frustrating it was to not be able to quickly find information and supports that businesses were desperate to access at that time. The question will inevitably be raised as to why our office didn't call another firm to supplement the departmental work. I think when you're faced with a crisis, the likes of which none of us had ever seen, your natural instinct is to work with someone you know and respect, someone you trust, and someone you believe will get the job done right the first time, which is what we did, on time and on budget. In total, we produced 103 hours of work, including 56 products, worked by 5 people over 17 days. This represented extremely good value for dollar, was excellent by any standard, and we are proud of the good work we delivered. I think it's also important to note that we have complied with all of our obligations at every step of the way, as we always do. As you know, this matter has already been extensively reviewed by the Ethics Commissioner, who did not find fault with the work or the need for the work. The issue is centered exclusively on recusal. The minister, in my opinion, made an unintended procedural mistake in failing to recuse herself, which she has acknowledged and taken steps to ensure that it is not repeated. And finally, I will take the liberty to say this. Mary is one of the most principled and hardworking public servants I have ever met or worked with. While her error was procedural in nature, I believe it came with the highest of intentions, to do right by Canadian small business during an unprecedented time. I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Alvaro. We're going to start with our first round of questioning for 6 minutes and go directly to Mr. Barrett. Mr. Barrett.
Thanks, Chair. Ma'am, thanks for joining us today. Were you listening to the first panel, the first hour with Minister Ng?
I was.
Okay. Were the dates that the minister reflected correct for the media training, the 10th of April and the 3rd of May 2020?
I believe those are the correct dates.
Okay. Who were on those calls? The minister seemed unsure of who took part in those training sessions. Are you able to recall?
I took part in the training session. The minister took part in the training session. Sorry, I'm getting some back. I can hear an echo. The video editor was part of those training sessions, and I believe a member of her communications staff was a part of those training sessions.
Do you recall how long the sessions were in duration?
They were hours long.
Less than 5 hours long?
I think less than 5 hours long.
Okay. Do you have any current contracts with the Government of Canada, any crown corporations, departments, or agencies?
I do not and have not since 2020.
So you made a point of mentioning the success of your business. Congratulations on your success.
Thank you.
In my questions to the minister, I spoke about the challenges that small businesses were facing and the perception that the Canadians have about an occurrence like this, and the judgment that the commissioner made was strictly with respect to the scope of his mandate, and that was on the Conflict of Interest Act, and he deemed that the act was broken, that law was broken. Do you appreciate why some Canadians would be upset that a contract for tens of thousands of dollars was given to a friend, a close friend of a federal cabinet minister?
Well, I think what I accept is that the ethics commissioner reviewed this matter thoroughly, did not find any fault with the work, with the need for the work. I think it was excellent work. I think it was necessary work, and I remain proud of the work.
I'm happy to hear that you were proud of it. Do you understand why Canadians would be frustrated that a company that's making $5 million a year was given a contract for tens of thousands of dollars by a minister because they were friends?
As a small business owner myself, I understand the frustration of a lot of small business owners who were unable to access information at the time. It's difficult to go onto ministry websites to find press releases buried with the information that you need. I think it was really important to be able to communicate simply and use all of the channels available to the minister and the minister's office, including digital and social media channels, including the media, to get out those important supports that businesses were desperate to get to at that time.
Canadians remain frustrated, having seen that the minister made this decision, and that it seems to be a contravention of federal law without consequence. And as my colleague pointed out earlier, that a small business who would have tens of thousands of dollars be taken from their business through ill-gotten gains by another individual, they would expect restitution. Do you think that it's reasonable for Canadians to expect restitution in a case where a federal contract is given and it's deemed that federal laws were broken in the awarding of that contract?
What I do know is this, that the ethics commissioner thoroughly reviewed this matter over a matter of months. The ethics commissioner did not find fault with the work, did not find fault with the need for the work, did not find fault with the contract amount. This was an issue of recusal, of which the minister has acknowledged and apologized for.
Ma'am, do you appreciate the frustration that Canadians have when they feel like there isn't accountability in government, and they then lose confidence in their public institutions because they see a case where there's a federal law, the federal law is broken, Looks like, insider backslapping and, helping ministers helping their well-connected and well-heeled friends. Can you appreciate why that would undermine Canadians' confidences in their public institutions like Parliament, like Cabinet?
Well, what I can speak to is the time that we were engaged to do the work as a supplier was a time when Canadian businesses were frustrated because they couldn't access the information that they required. Emergency supports like the wage subsidy, loans, eligibility, how to apply rules, those were things that should be simply accessed, not having to dive through ministry press releases at a time that was absolutely unprecedented. And I think that it was very reasonable for the minister's office to use outside professional services to help get that information to Canadians as widely and expeditiously as possible.
Thank
but
you.
Not, but not services offered by her best friend.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Ms. Alvaro, thank you. Next, we're going to go to Ms. Sachs for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Alvaro, for joining us today. Ms. Alvaro, can you tell me how many members of your team from Pomp and Circumstance worked on the $16,950 contract awarded in March 2020 in the height of the pandemic?
There were 5 members of our team, ranging from graphic designer, video editor, social and digital media specialist, and media trainer.
Thank you for that. And you said in your opening remarks or in your comments previously that it was 103 hours of work, 56 products on a $16,950 contract, which would come out to about $164 per hour to reach 960,000 small and medium-sized businesses in this country and 3.2 million Canadians. While my colleague talks about frustration, I'm a little bit frustrated about the misrepresentation of facts because I'd say that would be pretty good value for money. Would you agree?
It is a remarkably good value per dollar, in my opinion. We produced, if I may, 20 shareable graphics in English and French for business podcasts and IG Lives, which we also arranged, including 6 opportunities with The Kit, The Bay Street Bull, Katie Zeppiari's Together We Rise, Amber Mack, The Brand is Female, and Women of Influence. We produced 18 social media graphics in English and French in both story and static post carousel format to simplify the sports that were available to small business. We produced a 1 7-minute video with cut downs to showcase those supports with 9 graphic video slates. We conducted 2 media video training sessions, produced 1 graphic downloadable one-pager in English and French to highlight all supports available to small business, including eligibility and how to apply instructions for emergency wage subsidies and loans. We developed 4 Ask Me Anything graphics in social media in English and French to allow for real-time answers to any user-generated question about how to access supports. We produced a social media content calendar with all captions pre-populated. We developed an extensive media list for outreach to disseminate information about the supports and tools available. Those media impressions reached 5,146,800 Canadians through those impressions alone. I think by virtually any standard, that represented extremely good value per dollar.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Alvaro, for that very extensive list of the work that was produced from a $16,950 contract. One of my conservative colleagues who's in attendance today does come from the field of PR communications. I'm sure during her own time assisted similar projects and would know the value for the dollar. Ms. Alvaro, have you ever seen, as what we saw in March 2020, the volume of demands to a client as you did from the minister's office in terms of clarification and need for communication and clarity in media requests as you did during that time period?
Never. I've also never done as much media training in a single year as I did over the course of the pandemic. In the minister's office alone, their needs had increased somewhere in the neighborhood of 6-fold. So the volume of media requests that were coming into the minister's office, but virtually to all business who have a public presence, was extraordinary. It was an extraordinary time.
Right. And as the deputy minister had said that from time to time, it wasn't unusual to outsource contracts for communications in what would have been considered normal times. These were obviously abnormal times. Do you think that the 4 members of the ministerial team could have handled that kind of volume without external support?
No, I think that they are very capable, but I think that given the volume, the increase in workload, the fact that decisions were coming down daily, the fact that the information that businesses were looking to access was changing on a consistent basis. I think that also the minister's office and the ministry, to my knowledge, does not do the digital work that we did. They don't set up Instagram lives. They aren't looking for that kind of access point to Canadians. And so I think that bringing in outside resources, not just to deal with the volume, but also to innovate a bit, to use resources that were available to them to get that information to Canadians was an important move.
So would you say that in a time of crisis, this kind of clear communication so that small and medium-sized businesses and Canadians across the country who are facing real financial challenges in the face of lockdowns and the pandemic, that communication was critical at that time?
Yes, and it wasn't unique to the minister's office. There were businesses in all categories who were looking to communicate both internally to their internal stakeholders as well as externally. We refer to that time as the Great Pivot. Like, it was a time when businesses had to move from their normal operations, their normal communication operations, in order to communicate everything, all of the supports that were available through their own channels. And in the case of the minister's office, we have detailed those.
And I've about 30 seconds, so I have one quick question.
Sorry.
How critical do you feel this kind of communication is in pushing back against misinformation and disinformation that could have been out at that time, or, in the times that we're in today?
I think it was absolutely critical.
Okay. And Chair, how much time do I have?
You got about 20 seconds, Ms. Sachs.
Ms. Alvaro, you and your team during that time, do you feel that you were able to help Canadians get the help that they needed?
I do. I think that there were a number of supports that were available to small businesses, the emergency wage subsidy, eligibility requirements, how to apply rules, information around loans. That information was changing. I think it's very difficult to find that information buried on ministry web pages, and I think that we used tools, digital tools that were available to us to get that information out expeditiously.
Thank you, Ms. Alvaro. Ms. Sachs, Monsieur Villemure, vous avez...
Mr. Villemure, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Hello, Ms. Alvaro. Thank you for your presentation today. You are not a public servant and not subject to the Conflict of Interest Act, and I have no questions for her, so I would like to give my time to my colleague, Mr. Green.
Okay, merci, Monsieur Villemure. Mr. Green, you have the floor, sir.
I thank you, and I thank you for the opportunity. Welcome to the committee, Ms. Alvaro. I appreciate that. There's probably a lot of media. The adage that all press is good press probably doesn't necessarily hold true in this moment. But I want to get into the questions, and because I have a little bit more time, I won't rush as much as I have in previous sessions. Were you aware of your friendship with Mrs. Ng would have placed her in a conflict of interest when she received services from your agency? Somebody who's been around politics as long as you have. Was it something that you raised as a possible concern?
Thank you for asking that question. No, it never occurred to me that the work that I would be providing to this minister, which was similar in nature to work that I had provided to other ministers, would be problematic simply because I knew her better.
Did the other ministers or their chief of staffs contract with you directly, or was it just part of an open bid process?
No, not an open bid process.
It was sole sourced?
It was sole sourced.
So what would be the global total of those types of contracts, sole source procurement contracts with the Liberal government?
I don't have that number in front of me.
If you were to guess, you seemed very precise about this contract as being 0.5% of your overall income.
I think it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000.
In total?
In total.
So Ms. Ng would have represented half of your contracted services?
That's correct. I've done work for 3 ministers.
And which ones are those?
Minister Monsef at the time, Minister Baines, and Minister Ng.
Okay. And did you have previous relationships with the other two based on your proximity to the Liberal government in your time here?
I did not.
So Ms. Ng was your closest relationship.
That is correct.
When you're contracting out to services to government officials, internally, do you have any protocols to declare your own potential conflicts of interest?
No, we don't have an obligation in that regard. So we don't have a screen in that regard.
So for instance, if you had clients on your list who would be eligible for some funding from Ms. Ng, you wouldn't have to screen that for her or let the minister know that that might be a potential cause for concern?
I'm not sure that I understand the question.
For instance, do you have clients who have received funding from the ministry that Ms. Ng is responsible for?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. If you were aware, would you flag that for Ms. Ng?
Yes.
Okay. In your interview with the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, you stated that in 2019 contract was your agency's smallest engagement that year in terms of contract value, and that you typically do not take such a small scale engagement. Did you make an exception due to your friendship with Ms. Ng?
I think I did, because I think that when her office asked to do that work, and I have provided her with communications advice through the years, I considered it to be something that our agency could take on, despite the fact that it was a very small project.
You had mentioned you had quite a lot of staff hours set aside to this in a time when you had a massive demand. So you took it on because it was your friend and you thought that you can help her out. You were communicating with the chief of staff, I presume?
I was communicating with a number of individuals in her office.
Who's the first person to reach out to you?
The first person who I spoke to about this was Minister Ng. The first person who reached out from her office was, I believe, her communications director, Eleanor, whose last name I can't recall at this moment.
What was the nature of your conversation with Ms. Ng in that initial conversation? Maybe you guys are getting together for drinks. You say, hey, I'm squeezed. You say, well, we might have a service for that. Or did she say, Amanda, I need your help?
Well, nobody was getting together for drinks. It was a global pandemic. So the conversation was over the phone. She had shared with me that she had been tapped as one of a few ministers who were going to take on a major communications role, given her responsibility for small business. And initially, we talked about some of the media interviews that she may do. It was at that time that her office connected with my office. And when we realized the scope of the work was going to be bigger than just advice, initially my partner and I did not want to take on the work. We felt like we were too busy to do it.
But it's your friend.
But ultimately we did it because we thought it was the right thing to do, because we were a small business as well. And as a small business, we felt strongly that small businesses should be able to access information that was critically important at the time, including things like the emergency waste subsidy.
That you offered and the 100 other staffers couldn't. I mean, I looked at some of the scope of work, and I'm sure it is high quality.
Thank you.
But literally, this is answering questions on Twitter with some talking points, which seem to be fairly germane to the everyday average type of communications that senior staffers would prepare for a ministry. Again, 100 communications people within the ministry. What do you feel you offered that was above and beyond what the competencies of her team of 100 people and 4 staffers could offer?
Well, I think that I listed all of them, and I'm sure you don't want me to use my time to list them again. But to my knowledge, ministry staff and the minister's office, and I was once a political staffer, a ministry staffer, and I worked directly with a communications department. They're not creating shareable graphics in English and French for business podcasts. They're not setting up IG Lives. They're not arranging 6 live opportunities with the Bay Street Bull, Katie Zeppieri, Together We Rise, Amber
Did you
Mack,
have
the
to
branded
pay any of the
female women of
influencers?
influence. No, we did not pay the influencers.
So they did their work for free in terms of engaging on the topic?
Yes, I think that everyone at that time, there was a feeling of togetherness, that it wasn't all hands on deck. People felt
So
strongly that they
after
wanted to
that
get the
initial
information out
conversation,
to Canadians.
after that initial conversation with the minister, her staff, her comm staff, then follows up with you. At any point in time, did anybody raise the potential for a conflict of interest with either yourself or any of your staff, given your close relationship with Ms. Singh?
Nobody raised it.
In retrospect, do you think that might have been a bit of a problem?
In retrospect, I think that, or maybe on a go forward, I think that preventative screens around conflict of interest would be a worthwhile outcome of this committee's undertaking. Yes.
Something that was in place for the other ministers that you dealt with, correct? Like, for instance, with the other ministers that you referenced, they didn't call you. It would have been their department that would have engaged you, correct? Or did those ministers directly contact you?
No, those ministers' office directly contacted me.
The distinction being, did the ministers directly contact you or did their office?
The minister's office.
Okay, so with the other two cases, the ministers did not call you, did not have that relationship with you. There was a bit of a screen. Their staff undertook it on their own accord.
I don't think that there was a screen in those cases either. I've never been asked that question. I've never been asked a conflict of interest question. That has never been a screen in any of my...
It's likely, though, in your time as a panelist, you would have commented extensively on conflicts of interest and scandals. You're somebody who's very learned in politics. I find it difficult, Ms. Alvaro, that you would know what you know and not see this as a potential conflict of interest.
It, again, never occurred to me that I couldn't do this work for this minister, work that I had done for other ministers of a similar nature, simply because I knew her better. It did not occur to me.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations regarding changes that should be made to the Conflict of Interest Act as a vendor who did have a close relationship and pecuniary interest in a contract that's now brought you before the Ethics Committee?
I do think that one opportunity to remedy this would be to put preventative screens in place proactively, so that, and maybe certification, so that any supplier, and we heard from the procurement officer a few days ago who talked about the 10,000 contracts of this nature that go through the ministry. There should be a screen in place.
An attestation by the minister that would say that everything is in accordance. Like, 'cause I would put to you that I don't think it is your responsibility, by the way. It is absolutely the minister's responsibility to take care of this. And my questioning pertained to the minister in that regard. But would you agree that perhaps having all ministers and their senior staff, like we do with our MP offices, have an attestation that says that their procurement is in accordance with the Conflict of Interest Act? Do you think that would be useful?
Yes, or any kind of preventative screen, any kind of flag that would raise the question. I know this question was asked to the Deputy Minister in Procurement on Tuesday, and somebody said, in this ministry of hundreds of people, didn't anyone raise a flag? And the answer was no. Nobody raised a flag.
Yeah, and I think that's the heart of the problem. So hopefully we can make those changes moving forward. I do believe that's probably the fullness of my 10-minute intervention. Is that correct? Mr. Chair?
You're very close, Mr.
And
Green.
I just want to take my final seconds and say merci to my colleague, Mr. Villamere, for allowing me to expand on that and not feel rushed. It's less combative when I can kind of work through it without having to beat the clock. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. That concludes our first round of questioning. We are now going to go to our 5-minute round with Ms. Ferrari, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone for letting me sit in on ethics today. Hello, Ms. Alvaro. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I just want to start out to read into the record. The committee did receive documents of the scope of your work last night, Ms. Alvaro, of what you've provided. And based on your testimony today, we're clearly missing a lot of documents. So I just want to read that to start off. The next thing that I would ask Ms. Alvaro is, how many other companies offer the work that you do?
Well, I think that there are probably a handful, maybe less, companies who offer both communications support, but also, I think, have a political lens or have a knowledge of government work, given my background. But I think that there are many firms who offer communications support.
Thank you. Would you say like dozens, like there's quite a few in terms of choice?
There are dozens, yes.
Can I ask, do you do crisis intervention, crisis communications?
Yes.
Okay. So in your professional opinion, what would be your recommendation of media communication to the minister on this unethical breach that she has done?
I don't think I understand your question.
If you were providing crisis communication training to the minister, and she's been found of an unethical violation and breach, a conflict of interest of hiring a friend, what would be your professional opinion of how she should handle that?
My opinion would be that she should comply with the ethics commissioner fully, which she did. That she should acknowledge the findings of the ethics commissioner, because the ethics commissioner took the thoughtful time over a matter of months to look into this situation. The ethics commissioner found that there wasn't any fault with the work, there wasn't any fault with the need for the work or the contract itself, but that it was a matter of recusal. And I think that my advice would be to the minister to acknowledge that there is an issue here. And the member who I just spoke with, who spoke about remedies that could be put in place, I think that's a valuable outcome of a meeting like this. So I would encourage both additional training for staff, but also to be an advocate for some of those remedies that could be put in place in order to make sure something like this from a recusal standpoint doesn't happen again.
Thanks, Ms. Alvaro. So you've said there are many other companies who offer this service. You are her friend. Would you not have suggested perhaps that she use someone else? There are other companies that offer this service. You've mentioned multiple times how important the work was to get out, despite there being 104 public servants who offer comms services that are already paid under the government. And you've said that you didn't need the money. You said, you're a $5 million business. So wouldn't it have been better advice to say, maybe you could use one of the many other companies that provide this work that is so important?
I think two things. I think one, everyone who was involved believed that they were fulfilling and complying with obligations. And we did comply with all of our obligations. So I think that's one. I think the second is, and I said this in my opening remarks, and I feel pretty strongly about this, that when you're faced with a crisis of this magnitude that nobody has ever faced before, it's totally unprecedented. I think it's absolutely natural that you would reach out to someone you know and someone you respect and someone you trust and someone who you believe unequivocally will get the job done right. That being said, if I had known, and I didn't, but if I had known that there was an issue from a recusal standpoint, I would have certainly suggested that she work with another firm, as she has in the past. She's worked with other firms, which the ethics commissioner looked at from a media training standpoint. So I think that I absolutely would have done that, but I understand why she reached out to someone that she trusted and respected to give her good advice and good work during this time.
That's all the time we have, Ms. Ferrari. Ms. Hepner, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Ms. Alvaro for being with us here today. In the last hour, I was speaking with the minister about how difficult it is to be natural and forthcoming and also convey really detailed, important information to the public on camera. I'm a former broadcaster. I wasn't good at it for a lot of years. Most people, it's not natural. Can you kind of take us through how you train someone to deal in those situations?
Yes, there was a lot of media training of, C-level executives during that time in the pandemic, because I think that for many, it was in some cases the first time that they would be forced to deliver information to the media of such a significant nature. And I think the fact that the minister was one of just a few ministers who were tapped to deliver really important supports to Canadian businesses, I know her intention was to make sure that she did that clearly, that she used every tool available to her, whether that be through Instagram Lives, where people actually are receiving information, as well as traditional media. And so there were a number of products obviously created, which we detailed. And there was also training around how to provide information to media, and also how to deliver information in video format and through Instagram Live. One of the things we produced was a 7-minute video with cut downs. And we took what we thought would be the most popular questions, the most urgent questions that Canadian businesses might have. And we asked her to answer those questions, and we trained a lot through this. Answer those questions simply and succinctly. Give Canadian businesses the information they need without all of the governmental jargon. Tell them how they can apply. Tell them what the eligibility is. Tell them what supports are available, from the emergency wage subsidy through the loans. And through 7 minutes, she was able to do that. So there was a full-scale video, but there was also cut downs that she could use. And by that, I mean like small format that she could use over social media to be able to disseminate that information really quickly and clearly. I think that work was important work. We also did some graphic downloadable one-pagers, which were available so that people could easily get, the top 10 or the top 7 things you need to know in order to access these supports. And in some cases, as a small business owner myself who was interested in these supports, I knew the questions that I wanted answered. I was working with other small businesses. I knew the questions that they wanted answered, and I didn't want them to have to go to ministry web pages to try to decipher contents of press releases. I think government is really good at a lot of things, but using the digital channels that are available, using social channels that are available to them, and delivering simple communications is not necessarily one of them. So I think there's a time and a place to use outside professional support. And in the middle of a global pandemic, an unprecedented crisis of this nature would be one of those times, in my professional opinion.
And would you say that the pandemic changed the way public figures had to communicate to the public? Did it change communications in the way that the government speaks to people?
I think that it opened up for some ministers. I don't think all ministers took the opportunity to use the digital tools that are available to them, but I think that we're seeing more and more government departments and ministers use those tools. I think fundamentally, businesses changed how they communicated because they recognized that traditional media is just one output, and people are having conversations and dialogue on digital and social channels, and that's a way to really quickly reach people. But it's also a shorter format. So you have to be able to succinctly deliver that message in a way that's compelling and persuasive and allows people to digest the information in an easy to understand way. So I do think in some ways, it really did change the way people communicate. And I think in some ways for the better. It allowed people to access the types of tools that maybe they hadn't accessed before.
I think that's my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hepner. La prochaine.
The next round is Mr. Villemur. You have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will again give my time to my colleague, Matthew Green.
Mr. Villemur, Mr. Green, I recall that Canadian iconic show, The Red Green Show. Well, today is the Matt Green Show. So you have You have 5 minutes, sir.
I will take it and let the record show that opposition, the Bloc and the NDP, we can work closely to try to benefit Canadians. Ms. Alvaro, I want to get back to some of the metrics that you brought forward. A company as sophisticated as yours would keep expressively detailed reporting mechanisms to show value for money. Yet that wasn't released in any of the documents that we received. Would you have shared those outcomes with Ms. Ng's office?
I believe we certainly would have shared the earned media impressions, a number of which I have in front of me now, which was 5,146,800.
Oh, that's okay. Would you be willing to submit those to the actually all of the documents?
Yes.
Yeah, that would be helpful for us because, you know, as somebody who struggles to gain market scope in social media, I know it's difficult. But when I did a preliminary search for some of the hashtags and for some of the Twitter live streams, I didn't find much. That could be a problem with Twitter's search engine optimization, but I think I found maybe 2 posts. And so hopefully you can help us, point us in the direction of where those things are, where they landed, maybe with links, including some of the interactions that were had there, so we can get a better understanding for the scope in terms of the value for money. In your comments, in your testimony, you reflected frequently that the ethics commissioner did not find fault in the work.
Yes.
Would you not agree that wasn't within the scope of the mandate, that the mandate of the ethics commissioner was particular to the conflict of interest, to the recusal?
I think that the ethics commissioner, I mean, I participated in that investigation over a period of time, and there were many, many questions related to the work, of which he found no fault in the work or the need for the work or the contract amount. And I think that if it wasn't in the scope, he wouldn't have asked the questions.
Okay. But yet, as an ethics committee, you know, I used to serve on OGO, which is government operations, where questions of procurement would have been central to our investigations and study there. We're here at ethics. The recusal is the problem. You know, as somebody from the outside looking in, somebody who has dealt with presumably politicians in crisis communication situations and scenarios, you'll note that our Conflict of Interest Act does have administrative penalties, and they're nominal. Quite frankly, you'll recall, and I'm sure you're very familiar with the WE scandal and Morneau. I think it's around $500 or something like that. Do you have any insight or any thoughts around ways in which we can create a deeper level of accountability by having clearer consequences in place for when people contravene the Conflict of Interest Act?
And I think, and I could be wrong, but I think it was in the ethics commissioner's purview to determine whether or not he would apply that consequence in this matter, the $500, which he did not. But I think, again, that there's, and we spoke about this earlier, I do think that there are screens that could be put in place.
I want to go to deterrence, though, because the problem that we have with this committee is we keep having situations with a Liberal government who seems to, you know, get their hand caught in the cookie jar, as it would be with multiple scandals and investigations. I would like to get to a place where our legislation is clear, the definitions are crystal clear, the trainings are in place, and the consequences are there. I mean, at the end of the day, I would tend to agree with my conservative friends that, you know, when you look at the Bev Oda $18 orange juice, there was a time within the House of Commons where these types of transgressions came with real consequences. We seem beyond that now. Would you not agree that if somebody were to be caught in a situation like this, not an $18 orange juice, but a $16,000 contract without a screen, that there should be greater consequences?
I mean, I would definitely defer to the ethics commissioner on that question and
well,
his
the ethics commissioner can
determination.
only provide findings on the legislation that we provide them.
But also
We're
the fine that you
legislatures.
mentioned, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's nominal.
But
Let's
he
be
didn't,
honest.
correct?
Not in this instance.
Right.
No. Yeah, and I would put to you that it's not good enough to be continuing to have to come back to this committee with these scandals when there aren't really clear consequences in place. because obviously left to the minister's demise, for her an apology and a commitment to working harder, it doesn't resonate with Canadians who are struggling to get by. So any reflections at all, moving forward, I'm not even talking about your friend Mary, moving forward, where providing clearer consequences, clearer definitions to the act, and greater checks and balances in place may prevent somebody from yourself having to spend their time being in front of a committee like this.
Quickly,
think
please.
that-
Quickly.
I'm sorry?
We need a quick response.
I think that members of the committee and members in the House of Commons would have a much greater understanding of what that should be than I would in my communications capacity.
Thank you for your time here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green, Ms. Alvaro. We are going to go to Mr. Barrett, but I have something I need to inform the committee. We've had a request come in from the media for the documents that we received last evening, and there's nothing in the motion that deems the documents confidential, so I've advised the clerk to be mindful of any personal information, but to supply the media with the documents that we received. So I just want to make that clear to committee. The other thing that I would say as well, on the documents themselves, those that we received last night were in advance of the Tuesday deadline at noon to receive all documents. So we may not have received all of the documents at this point. So I just want to let the committee know that.
Point of order.
Go ahead, Mr. Green.
Mr. Bastard, I just want to make sure that in your considerations, we're including Ms. Alvaro agreeing to provide the outcomes, the metrics, and the materials that would have been subject to her consultations with Ms. Singh.
Thank you for that, Mr. Green. I think there's a clear understanding by Ms. Alvaro to supply that to the committee. And a reminder to the committee as well that the motion doesn't allow us, or there's nothing in the committee that would propose a report to Parliament. So any of the documents that we are going to receive will be for the benefit of committee members to further look into the circumstance of the contracts and the work that was done. So just want to make that clear, Mr. Green, okay? So
Yes, that means no concurrence motions, correct?
there's nothing at this point that would cause that to happen. Thank you. Mr. Barrett, you have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Ms. Alvaro, in your opening statement, you referred to preparing communication plans. Were you being read in on cabinet proposals or other market-moving information and economic supports before they were announced publicly?
No.
So the information was announced publicly, and then you assisted the minister in communicating on it after it had been publicly communicated?
That's correct.
Okay. So who would have prepared her communications and the communication plans for it once it had been announced?
Sorry, I don't understand your question.
I guess the question is, what was your function in preparing communication plans on information that had already been communicated?
So as I mentioned in my opening statement, the information that was provided in a press release that was in the ministry's website. The press release was provided to us, and then we turned the information that was in the press release into all of the extensive work product that I have shared with you today.
Okay. Have you ever participated in your work as a political commentator? Have you ever commented on findings by the Ethics Commissioner, other reports by the Ethics Commissioner, or other work of this committee with respect to violations of the Conflict of Interest Act for designated public office holders?
I can't recall if I commented specifically on those matters. I can't recall.
Okay. The Trudeau Report 1 with respect to the trip to Billionaire Island, I imagine that would have come up on CBC. Trudeau Report 2, Trudeau Report 3, Morneau Reports 1 and 2, the LeBlanc Report. You never had occasion to comment on those in your role as a commentator?
Well, I'm a infrequent commentator, so I am not commenting daily. I comment sometimes weekly, sometimes not. So no, I don't know offhand if I have commented on any of those matters.
Were you aware that they occurred?
Yes.
Okay. The reason I ask is just one of the members had asked about your awareness or understanding that there were obligations for designated public office holders, not for you, but for them. And, your friend being a minister, you being a former political staffer, that it's surprising that there wasn't, between you and the minister, an awareness that this would likely run afoul of conflict of interest rules. You would maintain that it was not something that occurred to you?
It was not.
Okay. So we have these contracts worth tens of thousands of dollars. Canadians don't understand how it is if they break the law, they're expected to face consequences, and oftentimes there's an expectation of restitution. Canadians expect restitution in this case. Do you believe that the individual responsible for breaking this federal law should be required to make restitution to Canadians? And if not, why not?
So I think it's really, really important to note that we as an agency complied with all of our obligations at every step of the way. I think it's very important to note that. I think that we have to not demonize the private sector for helping when help is needed.
Ma'am,
that's really important.
I was very specific in
that,
my question, ma'am, that the person who was found to have broken the Conflict of Interest Act is a minister of the Crown. She's a designated public office holder. My question is specifically with respect to the law having been broken and the perceived need for consequences by Canadians and the effect that it has on their confidence in public institutions. My question was specifically, why do you believe, if you don't believe that the minister should make restitution to Canadians, why do you not believe that? Because it is the conduct of the minister that I'm speaking to, and I appreciate the context that you're providing as the vendor, but my question is very specifically about the need for the minister to provide restitution, and frankly, because of its negative effect on Canadians' confidence in ministers of the Crown, this has precipitated our call for her resignation. So that was the nature of my question.
I'll give you a quick opportunity to answer that, Ms. Alvaro.
Well, I think I would defer to the Ethics Commissioner, who deliberated over this and didn't find a need for restitution as he had previously. I would defer to him on this matter, and I think it's important that we all do.
Thank you. Ms. Hepner, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. There's been some outrage across the table about the actual cost of Bev Oda's orange juice, so I want to go back to some of the numbers that we've heard here today. You said in your opening statement that your firm provided 103 hours of work, 56 products over 17 days, and we heard that some of these, some of the things that were taken from that training are used in the long term. It wasn't just for those 17 days. So it's a bit of a stretch then to say you were making $2,000 an hour. Would you agree?
Yes, and there was 103 hours of work for a $15,000 engagement pre-tax, which I think accounts for less than $130 an hour. In which we delivered everything that we were asked to deliver, everything, on time and on budget. It was excellent work by any standard, and it was extremely good value for dollar. Many of the products that were produced were products that were used for a long time because they provided the supports that Canadian businesses were seeking over the course of the pandemic. You could refer back to them at any time. The media list that we developed and how to connect with media, the training for purposes of both media training and video training, that's training that the minister can and will continue to use. So again, I believe that it represented, and having worked in a professional capacity in communications for the better part of 20 years, I don't just believe, I know that it was very good value for dollar.
Thank you. So $15,000 contract, I think it ended up costing just under $17,000. So would you say it's a bit of a stretch to say this was tens of thousands of dollars?
Yes, I would.
Okay, thank you. Do you think that as many people, as many Canadians would have been able to benefit from all of the government programs during the pandemic if they hadn't understood as well as they did what these programs were and whether they would be able to benefit from them?
No, and I think, it's easy for us to look back in retrospect and make assertions about certain things, but at the time people were desperate for information, and they wanted to know how they could access the emergency wage subsidy. They wanted to know what loans were available to them. They wanted to know how, as a not-for-profit or as a charity or as an entrepreneur, were there different rules that would apply? How could I apply? What were the eligibility? And those were real concerns. Those were real needs of small businesses across the country, in every corner of the country. And I think that being able to access that information simply and clearly was not a nice to have. It was essential. It was critical. And I think the minister made the right call to use every support available to her to provide that information to Canadians as broadly and as expeditiously as she did. I think she had the best of intentions to do right by Canadians. And I think that it's very important to note that all of the work that was contracted to work was supplied to the highest quality, was excellent value for dollar, and I believe really helped Canadian businesses understand what they were entitled to and what they could access.
Thank you very much. I don't have any other questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hepner. Thank you to Ms. Alvaro for being with us this morning, committee members. That concludes our work for today. I want to wish everybody a great weekend. Safe travels on your way home. Thank you to our analysts and our clerk for the work that they're doing. Have a great weekend, everyone. That concludes the meeting. Meeting adjourned.